All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest tonight. It's Jan. Welcome to the show, Jan.
Thank you. It's nice to be
Absolutely.
here.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad to have you on the show. So I know you've got some experiences you want to share with us. So let's get right into it. Why don't you just take us back to where you were, what you were doing, and what happened to you?
Okay. One very interesting story happened in Northern Kentucky. It was Trimble County, and I'm a member of Tom Shea's group, Northern Kentucky Bigfoot Research Group. And it was in September, and we all set up around Friday afternoon at camp, at base camp. And I had brought for gifting, I brought a colored bouncy ball and a bag of apples. I thought this, maybe I'm always trying to think of what will intrigue the Squatch or get its attention or maybe capture a handprint or, whatever. So, scattered the apples around. There was a really wide trail that the homeowner had for using like quads and things like that, but there was nobody there at that time, just the group. And I put several apples on a stump, and the rest I just scattered down on the ground, and a couple landed in the middle of this wide trail. The bouncy ball, I just sat in the woods. And so throughout the day, the evening, we heard some acorns hitting with a little force. I mean, they weren't just falling off the trees. We believe they were thrown. And we talked and had a good time. And I went to bed about probably around 1 a.m. And some of the guys stayed up around the campfire, and they just slept in their like anti-gravity chairs. And I had a tent at that time. So I went to bed in the tent. And the next morning, of course, I couldn't wait to see, if there was anything moved around or if anybody heard anything after I went to bed. So I got up and went to check the apples. And, I could see the bouncy ball was still right where I put it. And the apples were still on the stump. And I was walking along. And the trail actually curved where my tent was. It was heavily wooded right behind that, but the trail curved behind that. So where I put the apples was probably about 60 feet from where my tent was located. And I'm walking along, and I just stopped. There was one apple that was just flat. Most were untouched, but one was in the trail, and it was just flat, like a steamroller ran over it. And I, started looking at it closer, and there's no tread marks. Nobody had been out there, on a quad or a Jeep or whatever. And so I went back and I told the guys, I said, this is weird. This is something really super heavy. Stepped on that, ran over it, whatever. There's no tread imprint. So one of the other guys, John, in our group, came out to inspect it with me. And we tried to replicate it. Grabbed one of the apples and set it down, and I tried stepping on it, just walking over it. I mean, there was hardly any damage to it at all. No, you couldn't see my boot imprint or anything. And so then I was holding onto his shoulder, and I was bouncing up and down on the apple to see if I could get it to flatten or whatever. You could see a little bit of boot imprint, but that was it. So it's like, I think I know what did it. So we'll just leave it with that. But yeah, it was pretty interesting.
What else are you guys experiencing out there? I've had Tom on the show, and we talked about some of the things that he's done. Obviously, he's done tons of casts, and he's found fingerprints. He's found all kinds of interesting footprints, and he's casted most of those. And they've ended up in, well, I think he sends just about everything he does over to Cliff Barackman, and he's got it in his categories of different things that he collects for the museum, as well as I think Jeff Meldrum has some of Tom's cast. What else are you guys finding out there? Have you've had any experience with any other items that you guys have left out? I know, like Tom told the story about leaving the Nutella jar out and getting a pretty cool cast out of that with some fingerprints. What else are you guys finding out there? Are you getting a lot of vocalizations? Are you having physical, like visible sightings of these things? What else are you finding in your activity with Bigfoot?
Uh, well, we have a new location right now, and it's a real hot spot. It's a great area. Um, Tom gets us into some great areas because he has homeowners calling him. They're actually frightened because of the activity going on. Um, Currently, they're experiencing knocks on their house, banging on the house, vocals. The homeowner actually saw one, I believe, twice. Um, Tom, she saw one going up over the barbed wire fence, and she went out there after it was gone, and she found a massive footprint and hair and what looked like a little piece of tissue. So I know Tom did go out and collect that. I think that was being sent in. Um, yeah, a lot of vocals. The first time they stayed out at the location, I wasn't with them at that time. It was like a spur of the moment. Didn't have time to go. Um, they could hear heavy breathing. They had canopies with tarps because it was bitter cold and a propane heater inside. And they could hear like a very heavy breathing outside. And Keith, one of our members, had parked his truck just several feet from the canopy. And the next morning they went out and they took pictures. You could see where something had brushed up aside his truck and left marks all over it. They had a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken that was messed with. One member actually thermed something running up the side of the hill, which, we can't confirm what it was, but, we can only speculate. Yeah, there's a lot of activity going on there. In the past, I had really good luck with Reese's Cups at a different location. I had a bag that I sat out, and the next morning, I'm always really excited when I put things out late afternoon or early evening. I'm really excited in the morning to see what's happened, what's changed. And I always take photographs. Tom always says, document everything, take lots of photos, so you can tell if anything was touched or moved. But yeah, there was no question with these Reese's Cups. Something with hands opened the entire bag, and there was a trail of wrappers. And we found huge footprints. I believe we got 2 castings out of that. That was probably 2 years ago. But yeah, it's ongoing. It's all the time. Like I said, he's a great researcher. I can't say enough good things about him. He gets us into great areas. He's very knowledgeable. He shares that knowledge with us as far as his experiences and what to look for. He's an expert tracker. So, and he does share that information with us and what to look for. And so, yeah, it's a great experience. It really is.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I love about Tom is the documentation. He's very methodical in making sure that things get documented before, during, and after. And even if it seems insignificant at the time, it's all about collecting the evidence and finding out what may come out of it in the interim, or it may not be anything. And when he was on the show, we talked a little bit about even fakes, right? Going out and people hoaxing evidence and things like that. Even gathering those foot castings and whatever the case may be that they're faking helps, in my opinion, push the investigation forward, because you now know what people are faking and you know what they're using to fake these things. And it makes it a little bit easier to determine if something's actually real or if it's faked. And that's one of the things I asked Tom when he was on the show. We talked about 1 or 2 particular cases when he'd went out and actually found that people were hoaxing evidence, which I think is great, because hoaxing sort of sets us back, I think, in the big scheme of things, but it also helps a little bit because You're discovering what these people are doing and how they're getting the ideas and all those things. Have you guys run across any? I'm always very interested in tree structures and things of that nature. Are you guys seeing any of that stuff out in the field?
Yeah, occasionally. Our last research site, I think it was interesting that the homeowner actually had two trails going back to our base camp. And one day they found where huge branches were snapped off and drug across, blocking both paths into the into base camp. So, but yeah, we find different things, tree breaks, and I mean, not all the time. It's not as common probably as the vocals that we hear and things of that nature, but they're out there.
I've always been very curious about the tree structures, and I've said that on the show many times, and I've had people that I've frankly disagreed with. I'm more of a one to one correlation kind of evidence based person. So until somebody actually sees a Sasquatch making a tree structure, right? I don't think there's ever been a documented case that I know of someone walking up on a Sasquatch making a tree structure. So I've always been very hesitant when people talk about tree structures. I found things here on my property that are very intriguing to me in North Carolina. And
Mhm.
I was out in the woods just a couple of weeks ago, actually filming some pickups for a television show that I'm doing. And the guy was filming. He's like, "What is that over there?" And I'm like, "Well, I've been by that area a couple of times and I thought it was kind of interesting." So I go over, and the more I started looking, it looked like just a bunch of trees that were broken and, down in this particular area. The more I stood there and the more I looked and the more the cameraman was pointing out, like, that looks weird. And I'm like, holy shit, that does look weird. And the more I started looking into it, I thought, there's almost no way that could be natural. And there's these limbs that are behind other limbs that have limbs stuck in between them and they're bent around trees. And I'm like, snow load doesn't do that. Wind doesn't do that. And this is like 150 yards, maybe 200 yards from my house in the woods where I've heard vocalizations. And I was scratching my head. And of course, he's filming me this whole time. And I'm like, I don't want to look like an idiot on television. This is on my property. And it's like, I'm just discovering it. But it was a real moment of like, this could possibly be something more than just natural trees laying over or whatever the case may be. So I'm always curious to talk to researchers who go out in the field and get their opinion on that because I've always, like I said, I've people tend to start to believe you have one experience or you see one thing or hear one thing and then everything becomes Bigfoot. Every broken tree is a tree break and those kind of things. So I'm very weary of that, but it literally happened to me a couple of weeks ago on my own property. And now I'm scratching my head like, I don't know. I keep going back to that area now when I'm hiking over these last couple of weeks and I keep looking and scratching my head thinking, how in the hell could that happen naturally? And I don't know. I just don't know. And it's one of those enigmas that more questions lead to more questions lead to more questions. And I think ultimately for research and investigations, I think that's actually a good thing. So sorry, I went on
Oh,
that tangent.
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the more I experience, the more questions I have, and I think a lot of us feel that way. Just regarding the tree structures, and what do they mean? What do they mean? You hear about some of them that are actually like a nest, and it may smell inside. People will say, yeah, it had this horrible, horrible odor inside. And it may have like evergreens over the top, a little structure with evergreens. And it clearly looks like something has been bedding down there. And there are other cases where they're just, branches, like you said, kind of woven in. You know, what does that mean? Where they didn't bed down or anything, but I don't know. I mean, there are no experts on the subject, so it's only speculation, but it's very intriguing, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's what continues to drive me is the questions that I have every time I talk to somebody new on the show. I do another interview and people bring things up that I don't necessarily maybe not even agree with, but when they've had these experiences, I can't deny what somebody's experiencing. So I take that with a grain of salt and I sort of wrap it into this bundle of things that I think I know about the subject. And I start to research and look into some of the claims that people make, some of the photos that I get and things like that. And it's just one of those enigmas that nobody really knows. And I say that often. It's all about, like you said, speculation, right? We're all speculating until these things are actually identified and recognized as a species, and then we can figure out what they are, where they came from, and what they do. But what other experiences have you had personally when you've been out researching? Have you had other experiences that you've had yourself?
Myself, I was in Western Kentucky, and I had dropped one guy off, and there was another car with a couple behind them, and they wanted to stop, and they wanted to stop at a bridge where there's a river, and they were going to walk around there. So I drove on up the road. It's an old gravel road, miles from anywhere. And I stopped there, and it was very cold. So I was sitting in the car. I'd let the car run for a little bit, and I'd shut it up, with the window down. And every once in a while, I'd get out and do a couple whoops and, clap. And maybe about the third, I did it maybe 3 times. And I sat back in the car, and I would use the thermal too. I'd scan around with my thermal, wasn't seeing anything. And within a couple minutes of that last one, the last whoop and clap I did, I'm not a good judge of distance, but I'm guessing maybe 60 or 80 feet off to my right into the woods, I heard the loudest, clearest whoop that I've ever heard. So something was very, very close. I wish I would have recorded it. I wish I would have had a recorder with me, because it was a great whoop. But
Yeah. Some of
yeah.
the vocalizations that people have heard here in North Carolina, I had Julie Wrench and David Ellis from the Olympic Project on a couple of months back, and we did an entire show about the things that Julie's recorded on her property in North Carolina. I've heard some of the very similar things that she's recorded about 2, maybe 3 hours away from my property here. We've heard here on our property. So the vocalizations are always very interesting to me too, because we're hearing the same things, or people are hearing the same things in the Southeast, in Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia. You're also hearing it in the Pacific Northwest. It's being recorded in Ohio. I've heard things on the property here that sound very much like the Ohio howl that Matt Moneymaker recorded in Ohio. So
Mm.
I'm always curious about, when you're going out and you're seeing tree structures, and then you're catching footprints, and you're seeing hair evidence, and then you're getting whoops and these hollers, and even some of the tree knocks and things like that, which some people have speculated maybe these things using their teeth clacking, or they're making those sounds more with their mouth than they are with actually hitting trees. So it's all very interesting to me. I know one story that you shared with me via email I wanted you to talk a little bit about. What happened with the bouncy balls in the woods?
It disappeared. Not that weekend, but it did disappear, and I don't recall hearing that they ever did find it. Now, I did buy one for our new research area at CryptidCon in Lexington recently. Cliff Berickman was telling us about someone he knows that has good luck retrieving hair samples with a bouncy ball, and then using Velcro on the outside. So I purchased some of that, and I gave it to Tom. Whether he's used it or not, I don't know. I haven't heard. In our new research area, it's going to be a little difficult to do some of the gifting, because the homeowner actually has so many animals. So we'd have to be really careful not to, I don't want to put chocolate out, because they have 3 dogs. I don't want them getting into it. Or I don't want something contaminated. What are their other animals doing something, and we don't know what it was. If we don't see it happen, it's kind of it's a little trickier at this place, but
I
we'll
can
figure it
definitely
out.
understand. I have faith in you. That's one of the things I found interesting in some of the innovative ways that researchers and investigators are going out to try to get evidence. I know that's something that I've talked to Doug Hychek about from Monster Quest, and Doug has done that with bouncy balls and other toys and even cameras and things. He'll take, or has in the past taken, like trail cams and taken the batteries and everything out of them and just laid them out for these things to come up and play with, because some of them are very curious, and he's trying to collect fingerprints and any hair evidence and things like that. So anything that I think you can bring out in the woods into their environment that's odd, like a bouncy ball or even a camera that doesn't have anything in it that's not recording, I think is a very interesting way to try to capture evidence. And that's one of the things I know Doug has done often, is try to come up with new and inventive ways to capture. He's very interested in the sebum that these things excrete, this white sort of chalky, milky substance that we all have on our fingers and toes and things like that. Well, clearly these things do as well. And that's one of the things Doug is trying to capture is the sebum, and sort of go into doing some testing and things like that to see maybe if it's very similar to us or maybe other known primates or things like
Mhm.
that. So very interesting stuff. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing. So you mentioned you're part of Tom's group. Tell everybody, if you wouldn't mind, where they can find the group. I know you guys have a Facebook page. Is that right?
We do. Yep. Northern Kentucky Bigfoot Research Group. It's on Facebook. Just check it out. Join up. We
I'm
have
a
a lot of.
member. I'm a member. I love to get in there and see people's stories and the things that everybody shares. So
Mhm.
I highly encourage everybody to go on and check it out.
Oh yeah, I do too. Very interesting.
Well, awesome, Jan. I really appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you sharing your stories with us.
Well, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.